this session, comments and discussions by CILE faculty. We give our impressions. Those who did not speak give their impressions and their thoughts about what they have heard. So I'm supposed to say few things, but I will make them quite few because I understand that you have a lot of questions. So I'm afraid that the last session will not be enough for accommodating all questions about what you have heard today. So I will try to limit my own comments and response to what I have here today to just a few points. The first point which came to my mind is the discussion about Sharia as a term and the relationship between Sharia and ethics. The term Sharia has its own particularity and its own paradoxes. In the pre-modern time, Sharia was one of the most taken for granted terms to the extent that you will have hardly any definition for the term of Sharia in the books on technical terminology, like the books on ta'rifat, etc., al-istilahat. You will not find a definition for Sharia. It seems the term was self-evident and very clear, and it was not an issue. In the modern time, it became one of the most vague terms, and we all fight with each other. What is actually Sharia? So at the level of terminology, as a term, as a technical term, is quite problematic and quite paradoxical. The term of its value and its significance is also paradoxical. And in the pre-modern time, Sharia was a source of pride, a source of distinctiveness of the Muslim nation, a driving force for civilization, etc. And in the modern time, it became very debatable. Especially with the colonization, European colonization for the Muslim world, the deplorable situation of the components of civilization like science, technology, etc., and some voices even from within the Muslim world and from the Muslim nation started to question the relevance of Sharia for the modern time. Don't we as Muslims have all these problems because we stick to an outdated system, which is Sharia? Shouldn't we adopt the modern victorious systems now? And to my mind, this is a new question. Throughout Muslim history, Muslims suffered defeats, military defeats, and setbacks and troubles. Muslims didn't win all their military battles in the modern time. Even during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, they had very big military feedback with the time of Mongols, etc. But they were always depicted as the barbarians, non-civilized groups trying to demolish the Islamic civilization, not as the ones who will bring civilization better than the Islamic one. So Sharia became problematic with the period of decolonization and taking back defense. Sharia became again very central, and regaining independence was strongly felt as that it will never be complete without also regaining Sharia. Not only political and military defense, but also cultural and religious one. And this explains, to my mind at least, the very frequent reference to the term Islamic in titles. So if you read the titles and bibliographies in pre-modern times on fiqh, you will hardly read the title Islamic in any title. Titles of books were like Al-Mughni, بداية المجتهد ونهاية المقتصد, الموافقات, etc. There is no Islamic in it because the dominant civilization is Islamic. So when you write anything, it's by default Islamic. But now in the modern time, with the especially intellectual defeat or setback or questions, you need to emphasize this. And it became an identity question, even not only in the Sunni tradition, but in the Shia tradition. For instance, when Baqir al-Sadr wrote his book on Islamic economics, he didn't use the term Islamic, but he used the term our economy, اقتصادنا. So the we, they, our, their, etc. So it became also an part of heavily political debates. So this is one point. The other point I wanted to speak about is the role of intellect and role of text or scripture in theological, philosophical, and also juristic reasoning, التعليل الفقهي والتعليل الفلسفي والأخلاقي, etc. We have the polarizing debate in the early history, early Islamic history, especially between Ash'ari and Mu'tazila. And I don't know how to make this context close to you now, but those of you who witnessed the 80s and the 70s, the debate between capitalism and communism, for instance, very polarizing debate. When the debate is too much polarized, you can hardly take a middle position. Even if you are the most intelligent person in the world, you cannot, because if you try to make a middle position, you will be attacked by both. So you will be the worst guy ever. So it's very difficult to take a middle position, even if the middle position is the clearest and most rational. But after the end of the polarization phase, it will be very clear, and you will think, oh, how come did you do this? But the question, had we been there at this time, would we be able to think now, because we are now relieved from this pressure of polarization? So the debate between Ash'ari and Mu'tazila, it's a heavily polarized debate, and it had also its own socio-political context. We know that the Mu'tazila is one of the early religious groups which had strong affiliation, and some people would say even infamous affiliation with the political power. And to have this affiliation with the political power, it means you get positions, you get high-paid civil servants, etc. So people who will follow these ideas will have the positions. In a specific moment in history, they failed for many reasons. Maybe this affiliation with the political power was one of the strong reasons, at least to my mind. But anyhow, multiple factors helped them get weaker and weaker by time. And those who replaced them because they were against them. So to adopt some of their ideas because you think they are okay will be problematic, even if you may have some inconsistency in your debate. So the point I want to say is that when we follow the discussions in the Islamic tradition and throughout history, it's not only dealing with the text and scripture and Quran and how to interpret, etc. These are humans like we now. We deal with a specific situation. We have pressures, social, cultural, religious, doctrinal, whatever. So I would say in order to do justice to these debates, we need to take also these extra textual, extra scriptural elements into consideration, so that we will not end up worshipping these people, that they are infallible, almost semi-prophets or whatever, or the opposite, completely the opposite. These are stupid people. They don't understand what we should actually do. So in order to avoid falling into these extreme sides of dealing with the situation, we need to understand also the context in which these people were living and debating with each other, etc. One final thing about the debate on intellect and scripture, al-aql wal-naql, revelation and mind. George Hourani, whose book was mentioned before by Dr. Mu'taz al-Khatib, the conclusion of George Hourani, which I very much support, when you read the Quran very intensively and carefully, this diametric opposition between aql and naql is never there. So you don't find that you have to use either scripture or your mind. The binary division is between al-aql and text, so the mind and the text, versus al-hawa, versus your own whims and your own desires and lusts, etc. So the nafs, which leads you to achieve personal short-term interests against your own intellectual convictions. This is what's problematic in the Quran and what the person should fight all the time. So the whole binary debate between aql and naql, and you have to choose this and this. And I think the Maturidi position, and later on scholars like Raghib al-Asfahani, when the intensity of the debate and polarization became weak a bit, they made it clear that you can never approach the text without mind. So you will never be able to understand that this is the right thing in which you believe without using your mind. But once you get convinced and you get more and more of this scripture, this will form and shape your mind, because your convictions, more and more convictions will be born out of this. So it is mind, scripture, mind, and going forth and back all the time. So these were a few remarks which came to my mind when I heard from the colleagues, and now I will leave you face to face with them. I will only interfere if there is something necessary. So we will open the floor, and if you have any questions, please go ahead.
Why are we studying Islamic ethics nowadays? So if there is no an independent discipline on ethics in the Islamic tradition, so why are we studying Islamic ethics today? So I think I can raise many points based on the development, the historical developments on in this regard. Number one, I think because of the modernity, of course. So first of all, I would like to emphasize that we have ethics, but we don't have a discipline on ethics. Of course, we have a rich literature on ethics, but we don't have an independent discipline on ethics. So there are a huge difference between these 2 points. So we are looking for discipline, an independent discipline nowadays because of the modernity. You know, now modernity challenged us deeply and raised a lot of difficulties, and we have to tackle these issues and to give answers. And number two, the dilemma, the ethical dilemma was raised after the Second World War, the ethical dilemma. And at the same time that Draz wrote his book, and he didn't mention this dilemma at all, while he focused on the Quran itself without referring to any contextual and political and social and political problems. So maybe he wanted to focus on the text itself and to separate himself from the context, and to say that I'm focusing scholarly on the text and trying to derive the moral theory in the Quran. So maybe he did that in purpose. Yeah. So the third point, that the claims made by the Orientalists regarding this issue, that the claims that I mentioned, some of them, by Shacht, by Godzihir, by others, those who studied the Islamic tradition, and they said that ethics is not there, because they were focusing on the concept of ethics that they know in their tradition. So of course they will not find it in that way, but they will find it in different forms, and they will find the ethics everywhere. And this is why I will explain this tomorrow, inshallah. The fourth point I can mention here quickly, the reform, the Islamic reform movement. This movement is trying to go beyond fiqh, because there's انزعاج, how can I say it? Yeah, so they feel that fiqh is not enough to live in contemporary time and to answer the modern challenges, and to understand the spirit of the religion. So they are not satisfied with the Islamic jurisprudence, and they are trying to find another way to go beyond Islamic jurisprudence, and ethics is one of these main concerns. So this is very briefly, but there are some details in all these discussions, and not all the discussions on Islamic ethics are going to avoid Islamic jurisprudence, because some trends, some contributions, not trend, are going to trans Islamic jurisprudence and to avoid it. And some of them are trying to mix between or to reconcile between the ethics and jurisprudence at the same time. So not all of them are against of Islamic jurisprudence. Yeah.
For the first question about reforming Islamic thought, actually that was not the introduction on my lecture, but that was the introduction on the summer school, where I mentioned that CILE has as a mission to reform Islamic thought, and I think we should not be scared of using the term reform, because this is even a prophetic term. يبعث الله لهذه الأمة على رأس كل 100 سنة من يجدد لها دينها. This is a prophetic tradition narrated by Abu Dawood, and the Prophet ﷺ himself is talking about tajdeed, reform, or the renewal. Yeah, but Islah, if you want to use reform, Islah is there all over the Quran and all over and in the Sunnah. So there is no problem with those terminologies within the Islamic tradition. They are there. Islah is there. Tajdeed is there. So we should not be scared of using them. And like I said, they are in the texts. And actually, the question is, what do we mean by reform? We don't mean to change. If you want to reform, to renew something, it means that you want it to return to its essence. If I renew the batteries of my, of my phone, for example, I want to just vitalize my phone. So it's not about changing the essence. It's about because in every the problem is that the issue of reform is to go back again to the essence, is to make sure that the human understanding and human practice is as close as possible to the divine will. So you have to reform your thought, your understanding, your practice, in order to go back to the essence, in order to get as close as possible again to the divine will, because of the time that is passing and the reality. You can divide. You can divide from the essence, intellectually, spiritually, in your practice. You can divide from the essence. So reform is to go back, and so I don't think. And if the question of if we need today reform, of course we need reform. We are in one of the eras where we are in a situation where we are the most far from the essence. I don't think, historically speaking, that the Muslims were in a situation that they are as far from the essence as we are today. Historically, I think it never happened. So actually, I don't know if even we can talk about reform the actual Islamic thought that we have, because I don't think that we have an Islamic thought today for the modern, that is addressing the modern world. I don't think that we have this even. So it's more about building an Islamic thought in order to be as close as possible to the divine will, intellectually and spiritually and in practice, than to reform something that is already there and that we just want to reshuffle it or regenerate it in order to work again. Because what we have inherited was, effective 1,000 years ago, and so it's, the work is huge. The question about the influence of ordinary people of Maqasid, I don't think anybody can influence on Maqasid, not the ordinary people or not the scholars or anybody, because the Maqasid are not settled by the human being, but are settled by God throughout creation and throughout revelation. And the task of the human is just to try to identify those objectives and try to identify the means in order to realize them individually and collectively as per the challenges of the reality which he's living in. So the point is not to establish the maqasid or to influence on the maqasid, but it's to identify them and it's to establish the means towards them. I know the ruling is about sadaq. Yes, the ruling was about the sadaq, it's about al-mahr. And Umar, he was on the minbar and saying that we should put a limit on the muhur.
Bridal money.
Yeah. And the woman said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَأَتَيْتُمْ إِحْدَاهُنَّ قِنْطَارًا فَلَا تَأْخُذُوا مِنْهُ شَيْئًا. So she used the Quranic verse to contradict Umar, saying that God, says that there is no limit to the muhur. But here it's not about maqasid.
It's about the text, actually.
Yes, it's about the text.
She's using the text.
The last question about the maqasid far from the complex issue, etc. My presentation was especially to show you where the maqasid, the debate on maqasid and where where it started. And from where maqasid, the debate on maqasid and the theorization of maqasid come when talking about illah, etc. This is one point. On the other hand, I don't think we should, avoid complex question. And I think even if dealing with ordinary people, it should be based on scientific research and very rigorous research. And I agree that it should be open and accessible to everybody. But we have the academic level, and then we have the level of the general public where we can work on. Yes.
I talked about accessibility vis-à-vis application, how to apply them.
Yes.
Not accessibility vis-à-vis understanding.
Yes, of course, I agree with that. I agree with that, but I think the first step is the theoretical research and the academic research, etc. And then, of course, application is a very important step, and we may talk about this because we will talk. Dr. Matez will talk about some ideas about an ethical theory, and we will talk also about Shatibi in this regard.
And we will talk about applied ethics.
Also, applied ethics. Yeah.
Yes. Bioethics will come. Yes. Yes, please.
Let's start with the first question. How can we consider the cultural plurality when talking about the theoretical features of ijtihad? Well, actually, it was there already, and remember when we talked about the concept of tahqiq al-manat. We have
Verifying the rationale.
Yes, verifying the rationale. So we had these three steps in considering the rationale. The first step is takhrij al-manat, is to see what is the rationale, define the rationale. So we have several number of attributes, and we define which attribute is al-munasib. Munasib, which means is appropriate or relevant for the ruling. And then we leave all the other al-saf al-tardiyya, all the other irrelevant attributes. And this relevant attribute, so the first step is to identify the relevant attribute. The second step is, of course, to see if this relevant attribute is it extrapolatable. So it means, can we extrapolate it to other realities which are not in the text, or it's not extrapolatable? Is it an attribute that is of adorative nature, which means also that we cannot extrapolate it because it's adorative? For example, travel is an appropriate or a relevant attribute for, like, your travels. All of you are allowed to pray 2 rak'ats, for example, in Asr and Dhuhr, al-Asr, al-Isha, instead of 4 or 3. So, which means that safar, travel, is a relevant attribute for praying the half of the prayer. But this attribute, safar, for praying the half of the prayer, is an adorative attribute, which means I cannot extrapolate it. You see? So
like being busy.
Yeah, like being,
Exams.
for example, or I have very heavy work, you know, and it's difficult for me to pray at work, so I pray the half. No, it's not. I cannot extrapolate it because it's adorative nature. Or, for example, Jum'ah, I pray. Let's pray on Sunday because, you know, Sunday everybody is at home, they don't work, etc. So let's pray Jum'ah. So no, we cannot extrapolate. So I check this attribute. Is it extrapolatable? Is it adorative? And then if it's extrapolatable, I check it also, and I refine it. And this is tanqih al-manat, to see which characteristics of these attributes are irrelevant to the prescription. And I gave the example of, you know, for the woman, femininity as a relevant attribute for not praying in the mosque. And I see all the attributes, and then I come, and this is in theory. So in theory, the use of but in practice, we have also tahqiq al-manat, which means that I take into consideration everything that is relevant to reality, the cultural plurality, etc., and I see if this theoretic ruling is of application in this specific society, or if there is any obstruction to this. For example, if I apply it, the illah, okay, the illah is there, the relevant attribute is there in this reality, but if I apply it, you know, we have al-mani'. I don't want to go in details, but we can categorize al-mani' in 5 categories. And one of the categories is when the illah is there, but it will obstruct the maqsad. It will obstruct, you know, the purpose. So I apply it, the rationale is there in the reality, but if I apply it, the maqsad, the objective, will not be realized. Or if I apply it, the objective will be realized. There's another category. The objective will be realized, but there is a bigger objective that will not be realized, etc. So all of these are features to consider reality. And we have done urf. And you know, Ibn Ashur, he says, but this is for tomorrow. Okay, no, I don't want to say. Okay, so there is
your ideas.
Yeah.
All your ideas. Let's keep some.
Okay. You mean, I was talking about al-mawani', and I said we can categorize al-mani' in 5. And traditionally in usul fiqh, we have 2. They categorize in 2, but in one of my studies, I made them 5. We have al-mani' min al-hukm wal-mani' min al-sabab.
We sit tomorrow.
Huh?
We sit tomorrow.
Okay, inshallah.
They want to deceive you. About the second question about determinism and free will. Do we have the free will and the position of Mu'tazila, etc.? To the best of my knowledge, it's untenable and impossible, whether you are Mu'tazili or Ash'ari or whatever, to deny free will. It's impossible because there is accountability. Some people, those who do well will end up in paradise, those who not will end up in the hell. If these people didn't have the freedom to do the right or to do the wrong, what's the point of divine justice? That's it. So this is a bottom line that nobody went beyond. We have some Jabriya determinists. Even the determinist Jahm ibn Safwan, who is a Jahmi, he led a revolution against the Umayyads. So if he is a really determinist, why did he do this? Why would he make a revolution again? So it's very difficult to accommodate determinism in the strict sense of the word. The main question was the space. How far do we have this freedom? And how would this be reconciled with God's omnipotence? Qudra, الإلهية, that God can stop things and can permit things, etc. This was the main debate. And I think after the polarizing debate, etc., we have the rule, which is now more or less accepted by at least the dominant majority. You get accounted for what you can do and what you cannot do. We will never be accountable in the hereafter why our blood circulation is working or not, why our heart is beating or not, why do we feel thirsty or why do we feel hungry. These are things that are all automated in our bodies on which we have no control, so they are beyond our capacities and we don't account it for them. But we will be held accountable for the actions that we can either do or do not do. The modern time, and that's why I took the question, we have new forms of determinism, which we call genetic determinism and neurological determinism. Especially when the people were busy with the Human Genome Project. This was at the end of the 20th century. It was finished 2002, I think, 2001, the beginning of the 21st century. When they were studying this, especially those who discovered the DNA structure, James Watson and Francis Crick, the American and the British, they are very deterministic. They said everything is pre-programmed in our genes, and we are just replicating what is written in our DNA. We think we are deceived. We think that we do what we want, but actually not. Some people kill others because it's determined that they are aggressive. Some people do great works because they have gene of intelligence, and even they wrote about gene of God. Some people are believers because they have these genes, others are atheists because they don't have these genes. So everything is completely determined. After the completion of the Human Genome Project, the whole idea collapsed because we found that we have much less genes than what we thought. And our genes are not that distinctive. We have more than 99% similar like the apes. And the apes do not behave like us, and we don't behave like the apes. So it's not the genes which are determining what we are doing. Some vegetables have more genes than us. I think banana or tomato or something like this. So genes do not help us to understand our human nature in whatever way. We had also neurological determinism, which was even before the genetic determinism. The more we advance in scientific technologies, we get the impression that now we know that how we are programmed. To my mind, if we read in the Quran, we are programmed. We have been created by God, but we have been programmed to be free agents. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا. This is the programming. This is what's instilled in us, what's built in us. فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. The good and the bad aspects of the self, of the ego, are built in, are created, but they are not deterministic. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. So the one who multiplies the good aspect will prosper, and the one who will multiply the bad aspect will fail. So there is programming, but this programming is not deterministic. It's like the discussions of the jurists with some Sufis who say that God has determined everything for us, so actually we don't have to do medical treatment. You should have tawakkul, trust in God. Didn't God predetermine that I will be sick? Yes, He did. Didn't He predetermine that I will recover or I will die? Yes, He did. So what's the point of making medical treatment? Let us have trust in God. And the jurists, fuqaha, especially people like Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah, he said, but he didn't only determine this. He determined everything. So he determined, for instance, at 2 o'clock, we will feel hungry. So why are we going to eat? He determined. He determined. Yeah, this is your own private destiny. That he determined that I will be thirsty, but yeah. So the point is that programming, divine programming, is not dictatorial. That these how things will happen, but it is what we can paraphrase in form of natural laws. God created laws in this universe, and He asked you to follow these laws, the natural laws. If you want to get children, you have to get married and you have to have sexual intercourse with male and female. If you want to become healthy, you have to sport and eat healthy things, etc. This is deterministic. You cannot be chaotic and to say, no, I will go outside all these things. You cannot, because there are laws. We call them natural, divine, instilled laws, whatever. But then between these laws, you have the freedom. And every time you make a choice, you will be accountable. Every time you make a choice, you'll be accountable. You cannot make a choice, you are not accountable. Very simply. On this point, because we still have the third question to answer. Yes. Look, I'm not a geneticist, and my background is not medical. My background is Islamic studies and Sharia studies. But I do read a lot about these things because of my research on bioethics. And I meet a lot the colleagues, Muslims and non-Muslims, etc. Scientifically speaking, and I'm here, naqilul fatwa, I'm just transmitting what the physicians and geneticists say. We don't have any solid scientific background which is saying that we have specific genes which are forcing us to do a specific thing. All what we can have, if we go to the maximum with genetic determinism, is that some actions for you can be quite easy and for me can be difficult, but they will never be impossible for you or obligatory for me. And this is what we know in the Islamic tradition. We know that praying can be quite enjoyable for some people. They cannot think of their life without salat. They enjoy it. For others, it's too difficult and they have to do a lot of energy. For these two, some of them will have fasting, very easy, but giving money for the poor, very difficult, etc. So there are things which are difficult for you, easy for me, others are the opposite, but will not come to the point of impossibility. We have the case of the person at the time of the Prophet ﷺ who went to him and he said, my age to have sex with men is too high, so give me the license to do adultery in Islam. If we analyzed or sequenced the gene of this person, maybe he has some inclination, he had some difficulties, and I think he's honest. He would never come in front of the Prophet to say such a thing and to put him in embarrassment if he doesn't suffer great difficulties. Even polygamy is not enough for him. He wants to try women, etc. And the Prophet didn't give the license for this, even if it seems quite difficult for this person. Ethical reform is a difficult thing. Ethical reform is a difficult thing, and everybody knows about this. And that's why I personally have great difficulties with caffeine-free things, and tea without tea, and coffee without coffee, and meat without meat, and all this stuff. So if I have difficulties with drinking coffee, I'm addicted to coffee, and I want to stop. They say to you, okay, we will make coffee for you who doesn't have the coffee, so you don't have to do anything, and you have problems with tea. And we cannot go on like this, that whenever we have a problem, medicine will come and tell us that we can solve. When will we have this moral improvement going against the difficulties we have in life? This is the key of taklif, and taklif is doing what has a certain degree of hardship. فعل ما فيه كلفة. But it will never be impossible. If it is impossible, for sure you will not be held accountable, because God is just. I will stop. We cannot continue about this question on very quickly. Yes, epigenetics is that the opposite is what happens, is that the environment determines how genes will work, not the opposite. This is the epigenetics. Yes. Very good argument. Very quickly, we will have a session about bioethics in which you can ask these things. So this is this is the last remark I will say, so that I give the opportunity to my colleagues. Please, please. No, that's fine, because in my lecture I will not speak about this issue. In the Netherlands, the country in which I lived, I spent the second half of my life. We had a very important neurologist. I don't remember the name now. He wrote a book which is translated into English. It's in Dutch. Wij zijn ons brein. We are our brains. Completely neurological deterministic. And he wrote in this book. He did research, was published in Nature, saying that we have things in our brain. If it is fixed in this way, we are homosexuals. If it is done this way, we are heterosexual, etc. And his conclusion, if this is the case, then homosexuality is no problem. So his idea is that if we speak about meta-ethics, what determines what's ethical or unethical is our brain. If our brain is programmed this way, then it is the ethical for me. So if my brain is programmed homosexual and I'm heterosexual, this is unethical. If I'm programmed heterosexual and I do homosexual, etc. So brain determines what's good for us, and neurological determinism. In the same book, he discussed the idea of pedophiles, the people who are attracted to children. According to him, it's also neurologically determined. Okay, what shall we do? He says, no, in this case we cannot do this. Why can we not do this? Because the children cannot give consent for this. My question to this, why would consent make it ethical? Because socially we agreed that as long as you give consent, there is no coercion, there is no force, then it is ethical. Then it is ethical. So my point to this, whether we agree or not, what determines what's ethical or unethical is not the brain, is what we decide. Is what we decide. It doesn't matter how far you go with neurological determinism. You will have a point in which neurology will not help you determine what's ethical or unethical. So even if these people are neurologically determined according to him also, it's not enough that this will give license for people to have sexual sex, for instance, with children. So ethical judgment is something that can take note of medical and biomedical information, but it cannot be exclusively biomedical. Impossible. No, it's a question that I raised to I didn't see him. I didn't meet him in person. And by the way, I read the book after I left the Netherlands. So, but he's an amazing neurologist, and his ideas are quite striking and very provocative to think about.
I think Dr. Mohammed Ghali started his lecture very early. And I will moderate his session. So regarding to the third point, I think if I understood well, if I understood you well, the role of the Muslim jurist is not to produce the ruling, is to discover the ruling, because it's no Muslim jurist during the history can claim that this is his ruling that you should follow. No, it's the ruling of God. But we are trying to discover what was meant by God. I mean, the core issue here is the intended meaning by God. What He wants, what God wanted us to do. This is the question, the big question. So it's discovering, not producing rulings. So how can we understand the process of discovering the ruling, the الحكم الفقهي, when we say this is obligatory, this is prohibition, prohibited, this is recommended, based on what? Based on the process. This is what we are discussing now. And Brother Shawki mentioned some elements, some fundamental elements to define or to determine the intended meaning by God. So during the history we have many elements, so it's not a matter of just dealing with the text between it's an individual understanding based on the text. No, it's not that. During the history we have tradition. This is what we call a tradition, Islamic tradition. The Islamic tradition is a process. So it's a cumulative process, and it's not individual process. It's developed and settled during the history, and this is what we call it now schools, juristic schools. So this is why if I was a Muslim jurist and I have personal interests with politics, or I was enforced by political regime, so I'm not, if I issue the fatwa, so of course it will not be accepted by the community of the Muslim jurists. And you will know that, because the problem here that when we project our perceptions in the modern time to the process that happened during the classical time. Now we understand that there's a centrality of the state, and everybody is enforced by the political situation. And we will go to the history and we will discover and explore what's the impact, the political impact on Ahmad ibn Hanbal, for example, when he said this opinion or when he issued this fatwa or that. It's not the same, in my opinion. This is the very essential problem, because we are projecting our contemporary concerns on the classical time, which we have to discover and explore its spirit of history. So we are not living at the same time, and we are not enforced by the same elements. Politics in the modern time is not politics in the classical time. The state in the modern time is not the classical state, which is very central and controlling everything. There was a huge freedom in the classical state, which is not existing in the modern state, for example. The dictatorship in the modern state is much huge than the dictatorship in the classical state, because the role and the functions of the state are different, and the policy, the politics is the concept of policy is different. Now, this is why I don't agree with the Orientalist literature when they give much weight for the political elements when they read the Islamic tradition in the classical time, because they are enforced by the modern elements, modern conceptions. So it's a matter of projecting on the history, projecting new concepts and new perceptions on the history. So now, I would like to focus on three elements in the process of discovering the intended meaning. Number one, the tradition that I already mentioned. So it's not a matter of Mu'taz al-Khatib or Muhammad Ghali or anybody. Just he will issue fatwa, and then all the others will follow him, and then this fatwa was enforced by a political regime, for example. It will not happen, and it did not happen during the history. So we always have disagreement and a lot of very rich discussions in Islamic jurisprudence during the history. And this is why to be enforced by one fact or one truth, this is a modern. While if you will read any interpretation, Quranic interpretation, you will find for each verse different interpretations, for each verse. So to be enforced to give just one interpretation, and this interpretation is the only true, this is modern. This is not classical. So the first one is tradition. The second element is the practice, what I call it living tradition. So it's connected and integrated with the process of discovering the intended meaning. And number three is the intended meaning itself. How can we derive the intended meaning? How can we know what God intended us to intended from this verse or that verse. So how can we derive the intended, how can we know the intended meaning? This is a very controversial issue, and it's connected to the discussion that Brother Shawqi mentioned before between Mu'tazila and Ash'ariyya. For example, for Ash'ari school, they think that we cannot know the intended meaning out of the text. So the only way to know the intended meaning is the text. So the law is derived from the text. And based on this discussion, ethics is based on the law. And the law is based on the text, is derived from the linguistic implications. So مباحث الألفاظ, you know. So and so the linguistic implications of the divine text. So al-amru wal-nahy itself is the intended meaning. So now, with this case, I will finalize. I will conclude with this. The virtues are virtues pre-existing basis of the text, or they follow the process of existing the law. This is a controversial issue. I will stop here. Maybe we can discuss this later.
Okay, so I will take the question that was addressed to me directly, and I will leave the two other for my colleagues. The question of so this question relates to the al-munasib, so the relevant attribute that is of adorative nature. We said we have several different attributes, and if the attribute is of adorative nature, extrapolation is not possible. And I gave the example of the prayer. So safar, so travel, is an appropriate attribute for for praying 2 rak'ats instead of 4. But this is this attribute for this prescription is something that is of adorative nature, so we cannot extrapolate and say it's possible in other cases. For the case of fasting, it's different, because the fact that you can not fast in a case where fasting is maybe impossible or very harsh, or this is something that is not of adorative nature, which means that I said before that one of the main overall objective of Islam is التيسير wa raf' al-haraj. And this is an objective where we have several cases, several texts that are going into this direction. So, for example, one who is chronically sick, he's not supposed to fast. One who is old and his age, make it difficult for him to fast, he's not supposed to fast, etc. You have so many cases, pregnant women, and etc., etc. So here, some scholars did the extrapolation. I know there is a debate. Not all of them will agree that this is extrapolatable, but some did. For example, some said, ancient scholars said that those who are having a very heavy work, and their work, they have to work, they cannot, stay home, because if they stay home, there will be, there will be in mashaqqa, there will be in difficulty, because they have to, they work for the family, etc. So here they said this we can extrapolate the principle of not fasting in the case like for somebody who isn't traveling, somebody who is sick, etc. We can join this worker with this. So here it would be not al-maslaha al-mursala, but the case of al-munasib al-mula'im is something that is indirectly, considered by the text. And here they said it's extrapolatable. So they said somebody who has very heavy work, he can, if he cannot, take leave or something, he's allowed not to fast for some scholars. So here, based on that, some of our brothers in France, I know, they say that one who is studying and who is not able to, revise, etc., during the exams while fasting, Well, here we have also an haja, we have also need, because finishing the study is a need, etc. And so in that case, he cannot fast, etc. Now, you know, my position on this fatwa, I will not say my position, but you know, studying this fatwa, on one hand, we have the theoretical part, and on another hand, we have the part of tahqiq al-manat. Those are two separate things. So on the theoretical part, we can say it's okay. You know, for those who have a position that we can extrapolate based on that, it's okay. You know, it follows the same logics than other prescriptions that has been considered by scholars, like, you know, somebody who have heavy work, etc. But the problem here, the debate should not, so for me, the debate should not be there. The debate should be on the other part, and this is tahqiq al-manat. Is it really very hard or almost impossible or really in need for somebody who is studying to leave fasting in Ramadan? This is the question. And here, this question, for me, is not anymore really the authority of the scholar. The scholar finished here. So for me, my problem with this fatwa is that those who did it, you know, they focus on the first part, but the most important here is the second part. Did they do tahqiq al-manat? Where is your evidence? Is there any empirical study? What is showing? Is it just a feeling that it will be difficult? What is the parameters and what can define difficulty here in this case, etc.? So I think the problem of this fatwa is that the focus was not there, and there was no empirical study or nothing showing that really there is a need. And I think the focus should be there, and it should be, you know, established that really this can be considered as a need.
Regarding to the question about the contemporary reform, so there are different directions or persons who are talking about islah or reform, or they claim that they are a part of the reform, Islamic reform movement. But I would like, regardless the names, I would like to focus on some criterias to avoid speaking about persons or specific names. We should differentiate between personal reflections, those who are coming from preachers, new preachers. They produce or they introduce themselves as reformists, and the scholarship. So those who are coming from the scholarship and they produced and research studies and developed some their discourse based on the knowledge and research. So these are very essential to evaluate any claim of reform nowadays, because it's so easy now to talk about Maqasid and Islah, reform, Maqasid Sharia, and to provide or to give personal reflections, reading the text or reading even the tradition, or talking about any discipline in the Islamic studies in general. And the second point I would like to to mention here and to emphasize that the vision of the reformer. What is his vision? What is he looking for? Is it clear or not? So based on his vision, we can evaluate his production in the light of his vision and his objectives. And regarding to the person, it's himself that we can judge on persons based on his context, that he's providing islah or reform based on the link, or we can evaluate his production based on his context and his qualifications and his interests, personal interests here. What is his link with some rich businessman or political leaders or some states, political regimes nowadays? Sometimes you will find him appearing on specific TV, so you have to analyze the man behind this TV and what's the purpose of promoting this person in this TV, not that TV, for example. You know, so there are different elements can help us to evaluate the contemporary discourses now. Because the political element plays a big role nowadays with the social media, with the funding, with the TVs and the huge media, the influence of the media now. You know that. So it's not we don't follow the same rules that when we analyze our Islamic tradition. In the contemporary time, we have different elements that it play a role to support this position or the opposite position. And you can see that from the International Muslim Union for Scholars or Majlis al-Hukama, which was established by Emirates and Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, one of the Habib al-Jafri, and others are members of this. This council was funded by Emirates to against of the international Muslim to counter the international Muslim Council for Muslim Scholars. So there is a big political role that we can analyze and we can evaluate the production at the end based on this element. Okay, the last point before I go to the third question. The relationship with this reformer or reformist with the community, the tradition, the text itself, and the scholarship, the Muslim scholars. I don't believe that some will come after all these out of the text and out of the context and will lead the reform of Islam, you know? And I don't believe that somebody will reform Islam while he's sitting on his member. His member is the member of khutbah, you know? So it's not, reform should come after a very long process and studying and research and developing ideas and suffering from reading the tradition and following the contemporary challenges, you know? So it's not a matter of khutbah Jumu'ah, as you can Friday ceremony and just come and provide people your personal reflections, تأملات شخصية, you know? I think it's not discussable. So discussable, yeah. So because it's I don't know how to react. So so it's not serious. I mean, talking about the whole process of evaluating hadith during the history, with which we have a very rich tradition and literature. Over all the history, and coming that, okay, I found this not authentic and we don't need the hadith, and so against of all this historical process and accumulated knowledge. So I'm not saying that, okay, I'm satisfied with what was done. No, but I'm saying that this type of claim is not serious, and we should not take it seriously. This is what I'm saying. But we can discuss deeply some critiques that among traditionists, muhaddithin, or the lack of rationality of the process of evaluating the hadith, for example. Yes, we can discuss this. Yeah. The last question, the preconditions for using Maqasid. I think it's problematic for me to talk about that because the person Yes, I cannot trust anybody talking about maqasid without being qualified in the fiqh, in the furu' fiqh. You know? So even the fiqh itself, so usul, of course he has to be qualified with usul fiqh, but with fiqh itself. So if you don't know the system, the process of rulings, juristic rulings, and what happened during the history, you are not qualified to talk about maqasid. I'm sorry to say that, because many scholars, many researchers nowadays, they're talking about maqasid and they have no idea about the Islamic jurisprudence. Thank you very much.